Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this Humanities Day panel on reimagining communities, a literary roundtable. Um, we ourselves hadn't really imagined that our community would be taking this form, this online form, when we planned this panel, but it gives us a great opportunity to think about the ways that writers and communities reform collectivities due to oftentimes unforeseen circumstances. So my name is Srikanth Reddy. I'm the Associate Director of Creative Writing at the university. I won't say anything else about myself because I have a great list of panelists to introduce to you today. But before I introduce our discussants, I'll say a word about our panel topic. Reimagined Communities, a Literary Roundtable. This panel gathers poets, nonfiction writers, and novelists on the university's creative writing faculty to discuss their ongoing projects to reimagine communities, historical, contemporary, and for the future, in their writing and in their teaching. What resources do the past and present offer for thinking of literary communities in the classroom, in literature, and in society? So I'll begin with our colleague Will Boast, the author of Epilogue, a memoir, and Daphne, both published by Norton in the US and Granta Books in the UK. His story collection Power Ballads won the 2011 Iowa Short Fiction Award, and he's held fellowships from the University of East Anglia, Stanford University, and the American Academy in Rome. His fiction, essays, and criticism have appeared or are forthcoming in Best New American Voices, Glimmer Train, the New York Times Magazine, The Guardian, and The American Scholar, among other publications. We're very excited to have Will joining us today. Next, and yeah, maybe you guys can give a little wave when you've been introduced. Suzanne Buffum, our next panelist, is the author of 3 collections of poetry, the most recent of which, A Pillow Book, was named one of the 10 best books of poetry in 2016 by the New York Times. A recipient of fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Canada Council for the Arts, and the Jeanette Hyen Ballard Foundation, Suzanne is an associate professor of practice at the University of Chicago. I should add that Will is a professor of practice at the university as well. Hi, Suzanne. Mitchell Jackson's debut novel, The Residue Years, received wide critical praise and won a Whiting Award and the Ernest J. Gaines Prize for Literary Excellence. His nonfiction book, Survival Math, Notes on an All-American Family, was published in 2019 and named a Best Book of the Year by 15 publications, including NPR, Time Magazine, and the Paris Review. Mitchell's honors include fellowships from the Cullman Center of the New York Public Library, the Lannan Foundation, the Ford Foundation, PEN America, and TED. Jackson writes a column for Esquire magazine. Welcome, Mitchell. Daniel Rayburn is the author of 2 books, Chris Ware, a book of art criticism, and Vessels, a memoir of what wasn't. His essays have also appeared in The New Yorker, The Baffler, Tin House, and elsewhere. He's currently writing a book-length essay about his experiences with a homeowners association in Chicago, which means I think that you're crossing over into horror as a genre.
Exactly.
And our last panelist, Stephanie Swallow's collection of short stories, Last One Out, Shut Off the Lights, was published in July of this year by Little Brown and Company. Her work has also appeared in Glimmer Train, Oxford American, Ecotone, Tin House, New Stories from the South, and other journals and anthologies. It has been supported by fellowships from the Wallace Stegner Fellowship Program at Stanford University, the Camargo Foundation, and the National Endowment for the Arts, as well as the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown. Stephanie has an MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop and a BA from the University of Chicago. She is at work on a novel about fishing, oil, and disappearing land in coastal Louisiana. So welcome to our panelists today. I'm so excited to hear what you have to say about community and how your work reimagines them. And I thought we could begin alphabetically with Will. Each of our panelists will make some brief remarks about the subject with regard to their work, hopefully read a little bit of their writing, and then we'll open to a conversation amongst ourselves, followed by a question and answer session with you, our live audience, when we go live. Will.
Thanks, Chiku. Okay, I'm going to read a little passage from an essay about the year I spent working at a refugee resource center in Rome, 2015-16, essentially the height of the migration crisis in Europe. And most of what I was doing there was teaching ESL. And the title of the essay is The Grammar of Exile. The center was the crypt of an Episcopal church, La Chiesa Americana, locals called it. Part of a circuit of soup kitchens, NGOs, Jesuit charities, and anarchista collectives picking up the slack from the overwhelmed government facilities. The center was way too small to be a camp. Most of the camps and spots were on Rome's far outskirts, but it could feel like one. It was loud. The constant chatter over tea or chess, the thwack and clunk from the foosball tables, dubbed action movies rumbling out of the TV room, the whir of clippers as the barbers finished another beard trim or a Mario Balotelli style mohawk. And, well, the center also smelled. A couple hundred men passed through every day, many of whom slept in parks or on the street. With the classroom door closed, they could actually hear over the clamor, but funked up pretty high. My second, third, and fourth lessons were about work. Everyone wants to know about work, Daniela told me, the resource coordinator. The center ran a jobs program, kept the jobs board, helped the guys translate their CVs. In class, I did a role-playing exercise. Hello, I'd say, I run a farm. I'm looking for someone to help me farm. What experience do you have? Hello, sir, one student would answer. I can help you. I'm an engineer. Another would say, I'm an air conditioning man. Yes, very good, another would say. I study medicine. From talking with our volunteer coordinator, I knew the best most of the guys would get here in Italy would be seasonal labor. Many of them knew this too, but even in the imagination, I didn't have the heart to set them picking olives or tomatoes for paltry few euros a day. So my farm did indeed require an engineer, a doctor in training, its AC system fixed, each dialogue ending with a gratified, "You're hired." Back in reality, maybe we should have been correcting their verb tense. You were an air conditioning repairman. You once studied medicine. Whatever credentials or skills or licenses the guys had back home meant little. You needed a connection and or Italian high school diploma for just about any job here. Never mind Italy's 12% unemployment rate. At first I wondered whether the guys weren't next door where a kind silver-haired woman taught Italian to a sparse few. The EU's Dublin Convention, after all, mandated they stay here, country where they registered for asylum. But everyone wanted to get to Germany, Norway, Sweden, UK, where there were said to be jobs and good services for refugees. English could take them there. Wherever they went, they could be understood, heard, they could tell their stories. And if they had to stay here, for now, even the lowest rungs of the economy, handing out flowers for hop-on bus tours, selling bottled water and junky handicrafts to tourists, all but required English. It could be a foothold, a way up, however slow and steep on this new, unfamiliar, often unfriendly continent. Learning Italian, on the other hand, was admitting you were stuck. You were never getting out of this half-broke country. Learning Italian was giving up on the European dream. English is strong language, Ahmed, one of my students told me. It makes money all over the world. I started to correct him. The correct collocation was powerful language. But he put it so succinctly, I couldn't click. Well, it's actually interesting because the community that I'm writing about in this essay is not an imagined community. I mean, it is a group of, I would say, about 10 paid staff and perhaps 30 or so volunteer staff, many of which have been working there for years and years and years, and I continue to go back and do various roles at the center. So that, along with a guest who can really be sometimes an amorphous group, but sometimes you'll have the same people coming again and again and again and again. It really is a community that actually exists. But what interests me about the imagined aspect is that it touches on so many questions about not only what individual people are seeking when they travel to Europe as migrants or refugees, but also how the European community and perhaps the larger West imagines them. And specifically what I'm writing about in this essay is the way in which my students, and perhaps many people in this situation, imagine becoming part of the English-speaking Anglophone community and what that means for their economic prospects and their chances of assimilating into big swaths of the West. So I see it as both a real actual community and the imagination playing a really pivotal role in the system.
Thanks. Well, that's fascinating. And I already have questions for you, but I'll move on now to our second panelist, Suzanne.
Thank you, Chiku. So my last book is called A Pillow Book, and it's ostensibly about the kind of insomnia that accompanies new motherhood, but it's also very much about what it feels like to live as a white woman of privilege on the south side of Chicago, and the kind of moral whiplash that accompanies this position. In this case, this experience is filtered through a reading of another historical woman of privilege, Sei Shonagon, who was a lady in waiting to the empress in the Heian court in 10th century Japan, whose own pillow book provided me with my form. Reading her book and other books about Heian Japan, I found helped me to reimagine my own community through the lens of this lost historical community on the far side of the world. Because as foreign and remote as Heian Japan, of course, is to Hyde Park in the 21st century, I was struck by a number of surprising convergences between life in the Heian court and life at the university. In particular, both systems are highly bureaucratic and hierarchical. In the case of Heian Japan, the court is made up of chancellors and sub-chancellors and advisors and 9 ranks of officials, each divided into senior and junior and upper and lower, all of whom are designated with specific colors for their robes and number of folds in their fans. Which is not unlike at the university, where we have a chancellor and vice chancellors and provosts and various levels of professorships and lecturers and staff, each whom have their specific privileges and administrative duties. And likewise, both of these communities seem built around a kind of never-ending series of festivals and ceremonies and rituals. In Heian Japan, we see things like the Cherry Blossom Festival or Buddhist purification rituals or temple blessings or poetry reciting contests. And at the university, I find myself attending a never-ending series of literary festivals, scholarly conferences, graduation ceremonies, poetry readings, Humanities Day panels. And I think maybe most strikingly, I found when I finally looked at a map of Heian-Kyo, I was struck by how almost exactly it maps onto the size and shape of Hyde Park in terms of geography and their relation to their surrounding communities. Like Heian Japan, Hyde Park is a highly policed, roughly 2 square mile rectangle of relative privilege, cordoned off from surrounding poverty. In Heian Japan, there are peasants outside of the court suffering from famine and disease and clashing warlords. And of course, outside Hyde Park, there is a fairly impoverished urban community suffering from hunger and unemployment and gang violence and other consequences of historical and social neglect. And on a personal level, I also began to feel a kind of kinship with Sei Shonigan because whereas her job as lady in waiting to the Empress, along with writing poetry, was also to watch over the young Empress and entertain her. And mine as a new mother was likewise, along with writing poetry, to care for my daughter, who appears in the book as the character Her Majesty. I'm going to read just a few passages from the book, from my book, that highlight some of these convergences. The contours of my world, when I compare it to the ancient watercolor map I find on Wikipedia, would fit very easily within the gates of Heian Kiel. I live in a tiny pocket of good luck within a blighted urban zone on the south side of Chicago, in a townhouse a short walk to the university, the grocery store, the preschool, the bank, the emergency room, and the once and future home of the 44th President of the United States of America. Over the past 200 years, I have learned, since we moved here from the north side, this neighborhood has seen many changes. Some even seem promising. The ice cream parlor last, the yoga studio, the cinema. The Chipotle going up in the empty parking lot behind the liquor store is a good sign. Still, all day at my desk and on my pillow at night, I hear looping sirens tightening a frail perimeter. I cannot hear the lake a half mile to the east, but standing at my window some nights, I smell its icy exhalations through the trees.
Thank you, Suzanne. It's already becoming apparent to me that we're have many ways of thinking about reimagining communities on the table, and from migrant communities to ways of looking to past communities to reimagine oneself. Our next panelist is Mitchell Jackson. Mitchell, will you say a word or two about how this topic appeals to you?
Yes. So I think it's important in my work not just to imagine communities, but to imagine individuals who make up those communities. So I was born and raised in Portland, Oregon, and when I think about my community, I think about my friend Pooh Bear, who lived across the street from me. I think about an old guy who owned a corner store named Charles, who would give me free candy. I think about women making dinners in the basement of my old Baptist church. It was the first Baptist church in all of Portland. I think for a community to exist, the individuals who live in a certain proximity to each other have some sense of a connectedness or a shared destiny. And when I write about community, I'm trying to imagine the individuals in that community, what it means to understand the outside forces that shaped the community, but also the interior lives of those people that make it up. Their hopes and their dreams, their strengths and their weaknesses, their disappointments, their achievements, their failures. So for me, writing about Imagine Community is also cause to affirm to myself that a community is a group of people. The thing that I want to read is a profile that I wrote of a young man named Ahmaud Arbery, who was murdered this summer by three white men in a small Florida town. And I wrote this piece having never gone to that place, and we were already sheltering. So I didn't go to the place. I actually interviewed the people in that community, which was his own kind of challenge. But to me, the greatest challenge was to try to imagine the interior life of the man who was dead. So I'll just read the opening of that story, which is interesting because it starts off with imagine. Imagine young Ahmaud Arbery, a junior varsity scat back turned undersized varsity linebacker on a practice field of the Brunswick High School Pirates. The head coach has divided the squad into offense and defense and has his offense running the plays of their next opponent. The coach, as is his habit, has been taunting his defense. Y'all ain't ready, he says. You can't stop us, he says. What y'all gonna do? The next play, Maude, all 5 feet 10 inches and 165 pounds of him, bursts between blockers and boom, lays a hit that makes the sound of cars crashing, that echoes across the field and into the stands that just might reach the locker room. It's a feat that teenage Maude also intends as a message to his coaches, his teammates, and all else that ain't hitherto hit. Don't test my heart. Some of those teammates smash their fists to their mouth and ooh, others slap one another's pads and point. An assistant coach winces and runs to the aid of the tackled teammate. And the head coach, well, he trumpets his whistle. Why'd you hit him like that? He hollers. Save that for Friday. Let's see you do that on Friday. That Friday in Glenn County Stadium, one of the largest high school stadiums in all of gridiron-loving Georgia, the Pirates, clad in their home white jerseys with blue and gold trim, huddle in the locker room. Maude, who wears high shoulder pads, a 2x4 face mask, and number 21 in honor of his and his brother's idol, famed NFL safety Sean Taylor, swaggers into the center of his teammates and begins the chant he's christened into a pregame ritual. Y'all ain't ready, he shouts. Hell yeah, they shout. Y'all ain't ready, he shouts. Hell yeah, they shout. Y'all ain't ready, he shouts. Shit, they shout. To applause that could be thunder, the team stampedes out of the fog-filled mouth of a blow-up tunnel onto the field. The school band plays the fight song and cheerleaders shake pom-poms from a row in front of the band. There's a raucous sea of blue and gold in the stands, including plenty of Maude's people. Game time, the opposing team calls the play that Maude put the fierce kaput on in practice, and beneath a metal halide glare that's also a gauntlet, Maude barrels towards the running back and boom, lays a hit that sounds like trucks colliding. It's a noise that resounds across the field and into the stands that just might ring all over Brunswick. The fans send up a roar, but Maude trots to the sidelines almost. An assistant coach who also coached Maude on JV grabs him by his face mask. Now that's how you hit, he says, tamping astonishment that a boy his size could hit that hard. But that's young Maude, undersized in the physical sense, supersized in heart.
Beautiful, Mitchell. Thank you. So many different ways of imagining communities and life worlds coming together here. Maybe I'll turn to Dan Rayburn next to talk about his work in nonfiction.
All right. First, I have to recover from a little. Mitchell's reading Reawaken My Trauma from playing Texas football in the 1980s, getting hit so hard. I probably still lost a few IQ points from those games. So I'm also working on a book about Hyde Park, like Suzanne. It's a book about real estate in Chicago. It's called The Land of California. The title comes from the famous song about Chicago called Sweet Home Chicago, which we've all heard or think we have heard. Robert Johnson wrote it during the Great Depression. It's a song about the Great Migration. And in it, he called Chicago the land of California because it was a metaphor for the prosperity that migrant workers thought they would find here on the South Side. It basically meant that Chicago was the promised land. As we probably have noticed, that part of the song got dropped or sort of dumbed down in the 1980s when two Chicago comedians who shall not be named, but who played blues musicians in a famous movie, they changed the lyrics to the song from the land of California to that same old place. And that act of like erasure or whitewashing, deracination, to me, it represents a failure of the imagination, and pretty much is unintentionally telling. I think it sort of tells the story of Chicago and the South Side in particular in a nutshell. So I'm going to read the opening to this book. We'll get to California, I promise. I spent 7 months out there, and I do mean spent, renting a pistachio green bungalow in Oakland. And if I hadn't rented out there, I wouldn't have wound up buying here on the south side of Chicago in this trailer park. It's not a real trailer park. The real parks don't start until Chicago starts to end, out on the fringes of what's called Chicagoland, a 10,000 square mile quilt of Oak Grove Glen Park forests that surrounds us. Our lazy boy showrooms and toilet paper superstores sit side by side with the cornfields. Parks out there are actual, literal trailer parks. Parks just like the one I worked at when I was 12 years old, back in the 1980s, in Texas, where I picked up beer cans and dog turds for $2.50 an hour, scoured a dead man's sink with Comet, trying to eradicate the smell of his life, where I unpinned a penthouse pet missionaries had thrown buck knives at, end over end, until she and the living room wall behind her were in tatters. Also, I inquired gently about the rent from the guy who was months behind on it, who took a swig from his long neck while he pissed off of his front porch, fluid flowing in and out of him as though he were one of those uncircumcised limestone cherubs that tinkle in the middle of a rich lady's flower garden. That was a trailer park, and those were real trailers. This place isn't really a trailer. It's a 3-story brick apartment building at the northwest corner of 51st and Blackstone. A condo. My condo. My 2.5 bedroom stab at the American dream. A place so Chicago-ish that when I moved here in early 2001 and friends asked, "What's the new place like?" I told them it was basically every 2 or 3 bedroom apartment they'd ever been in combined. Been in Chicago in the 1990s, that is, when we were all in our 20s. It had the same scarred oak floors we'd slid across in our socks, sloshing our drinks and scaring the cat. The same gray radiators that hissed while we'd explained ourselves for the 1,000th time to whatever tear-streaked, soon-to-be ex was hugging his or her knees on the futon. The same chalky white paint that had been on every ceiling we'd ever woken up under and stared at blankly. Every medicine cabinet we'd ever peeked in, every toilet handle we jiggled in an attempt to make it stop running, every faucet that jerked when you turned it on or off, making the pipes in the wall shudder. I told my friends to imagine every dinner party, Halloween party, and New Year's Eve they'd ever had one too many at. Every living room they'd ever watched Sosa homer or Rodman rebound in, their eyes watering from the weed the friend of a friend had just paid $50 for to the guy coughing his lungs out on the couch. Add up all those apartments and divide, and you had mine, 100% average.
Thank you, Dan. That feels like home to me. So that we'll have a little time to talk at the end. Let me just move without further ado to a colleague, Stephanie Swallow.
Thank you, Tiku. I'm going to share my screen. I'm the only one with slides here. Sorry, you guys. All right. So I'm a fiction writer. I grew up in Southwest Louisiana in the city of Lake Charles, in a trailer park, Dan, an actual one. I left at 18, but I've never stopped looking back. I write about almost nothing else, but my feelings about the place are ambivalent. Lake Charles is a petrochemical town on a working coast. Its economy is tightly tethered to the oil industry and casinos. Lake Charles proper is more than 50% Black and brown, and even so, the majority white governing body for the parish voted not too long ago to keep a Confederate monument on the courthouse lawn. You can see it sort of in the right-hand corner over there. When I was growing up there in the 80s and 90s, I felt deeply exasperated with my white working class, anti-intellectual, anti-difference, often overtly bigoted corner of the community. So like many do, I threw up my hands and I left. Still, I've never stopped being there. The voice of Lake Charles, as I imagine it, is the voice I argue with most in my fiction, and I have been imagining that voice's tones and tactics nearly unchanged for more than 20 years. It sounds a little bit like this when it shows up in my fiction. It was the industrial plants, the price of gas, the addictive games, crappy jobs, hopeless brothers, polluted waters, the stifling reek of sulfur and tanker truck exhaust. It was the vague, embedded memory of those desolate 80s, the oil bust years, the slim Christmases and government-issued cheese food, the bumper stickers everywhere that read "Last one out, shut off the lights." What candle could light such a darkness? On August 27th, a Category 4 hurricane completely wiped out Lake Charles. Right now, it looks like this, and its residents are salvaging their belongings, filling out FEMA applications and insurance claims, and scrambling for potable water and hotel vouchers and a place to stay and gas to get there. Meanwhile, I'm sitting here 1,000 miles away with you with a bird's eye view of the ruin that is my hometown, and I'm wondering how to imagine a community out of this wreckage, whether I even should, whether and what part fiction written from a distance has in this reimagining, if any at all. It feels like a profoundly narcissistic endeavor, and I feel very, very far away from it. After the storm, a series of photos, aggressively curated, started circulating on Facebook of a golden, glowing, gorgeous Lake Charles. Sunset lighting up the 210 bridge, arching oak trees, a vibrant downtown. I was glad to know it could be this beautiful, that someone loved it enough to take photos of it in its beauty. But there were so many posts too, asserting that everyone was working together right now. Never mind black or white or purple. Nobody was seeing race. And wasn't it beautiful how people were working together? And it is. I love knowing that Lake Charles is capable of such beauty, inclusion, humanity. It looked nothing like the Lake Charles I knew and imagined. But my version was just as aggressively curated, wasn't it? And it was 20 plus years old, the imperfect imagined community of, by now, an outsider. Could it be that it isn't the place I've been imagining, that it has gotten better, or that there might be a kind of better, very different from the better I would imagine for it? How do I start seeing that, Lake Charles? 2 weeks after the storm knocked out power for a wide swath of Southwest Louisiana, a local Black community leader posted a screenshot of the Entergy electrical grid. Green shows where power has been restored, red where it hadn't. Am I missing something, he asked. Hashtag structural racism. Any Lake Charles native looking at this map knows that the area in green is the predominantly white south side, while the area in red is the predominantly Black north side. This screenshot is, in fact, a perfect example of structural racism. Decades of disinvestment and redlining in North Lake Charles, the fact that the high priority casinos and hospitals all run on a newer power grid, as does the south part of town. It is all this made visible. The blowback from this screen was complicated, hostile. In some cases, one guy shared the post with this comment, "I'll say it, quit being a racial epithet, you'll get power when it's available." The Lake Charles community, at least as it is constituted on Facebook, shouted that little number down, and the bigot, a Halliburton employee, was promptly canned. That guy's bigotry is easy to denounce. Even Lake Charles knows that. But what to do with the far more numerous comments that willfully or blindly misunderstood the original post, that misread it as a slight against the heroic linemen who are working day and night to restore electricity, that deny and try to shut down even a hint of discussion about this bigger, older, more impervious problem. They want the golden, glowing Lake Charles to be the only one talked about, the only one imagined and seen. But Lake Charles, it turns out, is just as complicated and difficult as it ever was. If Lake Charles is going to reimagine itself, be something better, or at least something different, it has to see itself fully. You can't reimagine what you've never fully imagined or seen in the first place. I think that fiction writers can do uniquely even this, is to make the head-spinning contradictions of people and places visible, to make them fully imaginable to others, to map as precisely as possible this tiny corner of the world, just for the sake of mapping it, just for the sake of seeing it. And from there, what? From there, a conversation can happen, I guess. Empathy can happen. Maybe even change can happen. I don't know if I'm able to see Southwest Louisiana fully and all its complexities in the way that I need to. I'm trying though, and I'm trying to reimagine what I thought I knew. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. That was wonderful. And I'm so pleased to have heard how our community of writers at the university has creative writing program is in some ways opened up a whole multiverse of communities, historical, from high-end Japan to contemporary and foreign lands, immigrant communities, and domestic communities that have been neglected in rural Georgia, Lake Charles, and even here at home in Chicago. So I think what we'll do now is open up the conversation to questions from the audience in live real time. I have lots of questions for you guys, but maybe I'll get a chance to ask some of them during the Q&A. But I really hope that our audience will be able to join this community and help us think about the ways that we reimagine not only literary communities, historical communities, but ourselves in the process. So thanks for joining us. And now to your questions.